If you will be turning to 1 Kings, we'll be picking up where we left off in 1 Kings. We should get a little bit further today than what we did in that first class time that we had. There was a lot to unpack in the first 10 verses. There was a lot of things to discuss, whereas what we're fixing to see is more of a discussion that's had between primarily Bathsheba, King David, and as well as Nathan. But what we did look at, just quick recap, we remember we have our major 4-point outline, and we are within the first section still, King David's last days, covering chapter 1 to chapter 2 and verse 12. And what we had actually got into is our first heading under that, King David's last days, was this deceitful exaltation and the opportune circumstance recognized in the first 4 verses. Remember, we questioned, okay, why is it that we're talking about David being very frail, very weak? He's bedridden. He has to have someone come in and take care of him. Somewhat of showing us why Adonijah maybe got the thought and the idea, okay, well, I'm fixing to try and take the kingdom. Here's my opportune circumstance, right? So we discussed some of those things, as well as the beginning of these political moves in verses 5 through 10, where Adonijah is beginning to pick his team, if you will, right? And we recognize if he's going to begin to get this following, he's going to have some people on his side. And we noticed 2 of the people that were actually following with him was a priest as well as a military leader, right? And keep that in mind as we move through the text in this next section, because we're going to look at what David does to counter some of these things, and you'll see some similarities. So we will go ahead and continue. We'll pick up in verse 11. We only got through the first 10 verses last time. We'll pick up in verse 11, and we'll begin going through the text. Let me get to my spot, the notes. I was back at verse 1. We'll start there at verse 11 and then move forward. If somebody will, read verses 11 and 12, please.
So Nathan spoke to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, "Have you not heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, has become king? And David our Lord does not know it? Come, please let me now give you advice that you may save your own life and the life of your son Solomon."
Thank you. Okay, so this next section is titled Counter Moves. We've seen what Adonijah is trying to do in trying to take the kingdom, and now we're fixing to see the counter moves going directly against that. And that first verse in verse 11, Nathan goes to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, "Have you not heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, has become king?" Now, if she hasn't heard about it, more than likely Solomon hasn't heard about it. So that would immediately give us the thought, okay, well, Adonijah's plan is somewhat working, right? Remember, there were certain individuals that he did not invite to this gathering for him to be seen as king. And Solomon was in that list. So it's starting to work, I guess, if you will, his plan. Now, when you think about this, though, you notice that he said he has become king. Right? He claims it as if he's already become king, and I think he's saying that in the sense so that there's some urgency. Look, the ball's rolling, and it's in his court. We need to make haste, and we need to do something about this. Now, he's not technically king yet, but he's not very far from it. So basically the thought is, okay, we need to move quickly, and now he's gone to Bathsheba. This is what we know of. It's his first person he's going to talk to. Now, Bathsheba didn't know about it. Solomon didn't know about it. Nathan did. But we don't have any idea exactly how he found out, right? It doesn't tell us in the text, but somehow, now he is a prophet of God, but we don't know exactly how he come by the information, but he knows about it, and now he is going directly to her to begin discussing, okay, here's what we need to do. And one of the things that's interesting there in verse 12, did you catch the end of that? You know, he says, this is what's going on. Have you not heard? Well, Bathsheba doesn't know. Now he says, okay, come please, let me now give you advice that you may save your life and the life of your son Solomon. Do you think that's for real?
Yeah, of course.
To the point that, right, their lives could be taken? So there's some serious urgency here, right? Well, you think about it and you look at that and what he says, we have to take it for face value, and he will do something of that nature given the opportunity. Well, he ultimately might kill anyone who stands in his way of usurping the throne, right? He wants the kingdom. And now Nathan's telling her, look, your life is on the line, and your son's life is on the line just the same. So you have to assume the power, the prestige, the wealth that comes with being that of the king will push him even to the point of murdering those who are in his family, right? This is a stepbrother, but it's still a brother, right? They have the same father. And even to the point where Nathan's telling her, look, your life's on the line. All that for a kingship. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely.
He's going to eliminate all threats.
Mm-hmm. And it's, looking at the text, it's almost like, okay, well, as soon as he has the people on his side, right, he's out there trying to gain this following. He's trying to get the people to follow him and see him as king. And if he gets that, it probably wouldn't be long before he starts trying to conspire and figure out a way, okay, well, I need to remove any threats. And just like you say, he sees him as a threat, right? And Nathan now telling Bathsheba, we got to do something about this. Well, considering these things, as well as what we had discussed in the previous study, I think there's some points of application that we can make real quick before we move forward. Now, recognizing what Adonijah is doing here, this self-exaltation, right? One of the things that we could take from that is don't assume just because you want to be exalted that you are due to be exalted, right? He immediately has this prideful, this arrogant type mentality where he says, I'm going to be king. I see this opportunity and I'm going to seize it and I'm pushing forward, right? Well, the Bible clearly says the one who exalts himself will be humbled, right? And the one who is humble will be exalted. We can't get ahead of God's plan in our own lives, and we need to make sure that we are remaining humble, and if we're going to be exalted, allow God to be the one who does the exalting so that we don't have that same type of entitlement behavior or even a prideful behavior. But even past that, one of the things I was considering as it pertains to this family of David's, we've already seen some things of this nature, but what should they have been doing with David at the point of almost death? I mean, he's extremely weak, right? What should they have been doing?
Preparing Solomon to become king.
What's that?
Preparing Solomon to become king.
Well, yes, but even David's family, you have one of his sons now rebelling against him.
It comes down to David. He's king, so that should.
Right. And we're gonna see Bathsheba kind of push that here as we move forwards in the text. But even with David, where he's at this point, you would think his sons would be trying to enjoy that time with him, right? Try and get, see if there's any need that he might have or anything that they can do to help him. But yet this son, Adonijah, he's like, no, I'm taking advantage of this, right? He's so self-centered and so focused on what he wants that he's even going to use this opportunity to try and make that happen. Well, we can't look at a situation and say, how can this benefit me if it works out in this direction, right? That's how he gets this mindset of I'm going to abuse the situation so it will favor me better than it does anybody else, rather than seeing his father at this weak point in his life and thinking, you know what, maybe I could help him out a little bit. Maybe there's something I could do for him. Just a few thoughts. But let's go ahead and let's look at verses 13 and 14. If somebody will, please read verse 13 and 14.
Go immediately to King David and say to him, Did you not, my lord, O king, swear to your maidservant, saying, Assuredly your son Solomon shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? Why then has Adonijah become king? Then, while you are still talking there with the king, I also will come in after you and confirm your words.
All right, so here's his advice. He has her attention, right? I mean, your life's on the line, got full attention, right? And he says, go immediately. You recognize the haste in this instruction that he is giving to her. And Nathan and Bathsheba, to our understanding, were aware that more than likely the king is supposed to be Solomon. He's been excluded from this, and we assume that Solomon knows that he was supposed to be the king. So he's saying, okay, we need to make haste. We need to do something because this plan of Adonijah's is almost in completion, right? It's almost fixing to be fulfilled. So both of them are actually going to go and they're going to speak to the king. And you notice even as he's giving instruction to her in verse 13, he says it in the fact that Adonijah has become king. It says that again and again. And the best I can tell, it's just they're trying to make sure that, you know, they recognize the necessity of haste. It's like we need to act on this quickly because he's not actually the king just yet. But her responsibility is to go in, to speak with David, and remind him of two things, or simply ask him two questions, right? The first question, did you not know my lord, O king? Swear to your maidservant, saying, assuredly your son Solomon shall reign after me. So apparently there was an oath that was made at some point. David has told her, your son Solomon, he's going to be the next king in line. And then she's supposed to ask, then why has Adonijah become king? Pretty straightforward instruction that's given to her. Now, keep that in mind as we move into this next section of text, but let's look at verse 15 through 21. Somebody read 15 through 21 for us, please.
So Bathsheba went into the chambers of the king. Now the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was serving the king. And Bathsheba bowed and did homage to the king. The king said, what is your wish? Then she said to him, my lord, you swore by the Lord your God to your maidservant, saying, assuredly Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne. So now look, Adonijah has become king, and now, my lord, the king, you do not know about it. He has sacrificed oxen and fattened cattle and sheep, and in abundance, and has invited all the sons of the king, Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army. But Solomon, your servant, he has not invited. And as for you, my lord, O king, the eyes of all Israel are on you, that you should tell them who will sit on the throne of my lord, the king, after him. Otherwise it will happen when my lord the king rests with his fathers, and my son Solomon, will be counted as offenders.
Thank you. Okay, so she's going to make her way to David. And at the very beginning of the text, we have this little statement. Now, the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was serving the king. Now, it hasn't been that long since we read about the situation, verses 1 through 4, right? So my best guess is it's kind of like a little reminder saying, look, circumstances have not changed, right? The king's still in the same condition that he was before. Little subtle reminder, everything remains the same. We're under the same circumstance. So she goes in and she goes to see the king, and it says that she did homage to the king. What is to do homage to the king?
Pay respect.
Pay respect, right? Show reverence, ma'am.
Respect and honor.
Right, respect and honor. Basically going in and bowing before him and showing her respect to him, her honor to him. And immediately following, King David says, well, what is your wish, essentially? So it's kind of common that she would go in and do this kind of thing. And he immediately responds with, okay, what is your wish? Well, what did Nathan specifically say for her to tell or ask David? Right, recognizing who's supposed to be the king, right? And then the question about Adonijah. Two things, right? Now, I don't know if there was a little bit of time lapse between when they had the conversation to her actually getting to where David is, but she unpacks a lot more information than what he originally told her, right? Do you have something you're fixing to say? Okay, I thought your hand was coming up, sorry. So there's a lot more that is said. Now, if you look back in the verses, what was actually said in verse 13, did you not swear that Solomon would reign? That's one question. Why has Adonijah become king? Verse 13. Now, she goes beyond these questions, and look what she says, verse 17. You swore by the Lord that Solomon would reign. Direct statement. This is what you said. Verse 17, Solomon would sit on the throne after David. Verse 18, Adonijah has become king, and you don't know about it, right? We recognize his position where he's at. He couldn't get out of his room. Verse 19, he has offered sacrifices in abundance. She knows about what's going on with that. Again, verse 19, he's invited the sons of the king, Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army, but not her son Solomon. So she knows the whole order of everybody that has been invited, those who haven't been invited. And in verse 20, she says, all of Israel is looking to you to appoint the next king. And then closes, verse 21, if you say nothing before you die, then your son Solomon and I will be counted as offenders. Now, it's likely at this point, as old as he is, that, the thought's been on the people's mind, okay, is he going to say who the next king's going to be? So that's probably valid, right? Most people are probably wondering that, and she reminds him of that. But the interesting statement even there at the end saying that we will be counted as offenders, Solomon and Bathsheba, if Adonijah goes through with this and he actually becomes king. Now, what will he be recognized as if he is removed and Solomon is made king? An offender, right? So what he's trying to do to them, this scheme that he has going in the position he's trying to put them in, if his plan fails, he's going to be the offender. But if he succeeds, they'll be offenders, and ultimately, like we saw, the Nathan's warning to her, your lives will likely be taken, right? That's the severity of the matter. So she says, well, we will ultimately be counted as offenders. Now, why do you suppose there's so much more information than what Nathan actually originally told her?
I think she wanted to convey like the urgency of this because this, especially if you know your life is on the line. Like I wouldn't be like, so I have 2 questions for you and that's it. And that's my life kind of hangs in the balance, but it's whatever. I
Right.
would be like pleading my case for sure.
Absolutely. You can recognize the haste in some of her phrasing almost. Now, I'm just assuming here because we don't know for a fact, but it seems like, okay, well, she now knows my life's on the line and I need to go talk to the king, and she has just laid it on him, right? She's threw everything out there and seems like with great haste because just like you say, she's under the impression now that we might die if these things don't get overturned. So she goes in and she throws all this at him, and of course, directly after it, just as Nathan has said, well, you go in, you give your response to the king, you tell him these things, and then I will follow in directly after you. And that's exactly what he does. Look at verse 22. Somebody read verse 22 through, read 22 through 27, if you will, please.
And just then, while she was still talking with the king, Nathan the prophet also came in. So they told the king, saying, here is Nathan the prophet. And when he came in before the king, he bowed down before the king with his face to the ground. And Nathan said, my lord, O king, have you said to Adonijah shall reign after me? My lord, O king, have you said, Adonijah shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? For he has gone down today and has sacrificed oxen and fattened calves and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the king's sons and the commanders of the army, and Abiathar the priest, and look, they are eating and drinking before him. And they say, long live King Adonijah. But he has not invited me your servant, nor Zadok the priest, nor Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, nor your servant Solomon. Has this thing been done by my lord the king, and you have not told your servant who should sit on the throne of my lord the king after him?
Thanks, sir. So he follows up just as he says, and basically he's going to lay out the very same things that she has just come in and said. Now, he was aware of whatever oath that David had made with her, saying Solomon will be king, right? Now, he does it in the fashion of the rhetorical questions. Basically, you have 2 rhetorical questions bookending the information that's piled in the middle. But it's not all that uncommon for Nathan to approach David in this kind of fashion, right? And it's not all that uncommon when there's a situation at hand where Nathan is the one to go to David and try and voice with reason to him, right? Remember, he's the one that actually went to David when it came to Bathsheba, right? He's the one that had that conversation. Well, now here he is repeating the things that she said, but, you know, you have one person who has come in. You have someone that, you know, he's very close to. You have one of his wives come in. She tells him these things, so you have one witness. And now you have Nathan coming in, so you have a second witness. But you also have another person who's in the room, remember? And she's a witness to all of these things. So now you have three people witnessing the whole conversation and what actually needs to take place. But in thinking about him, Nathan, as he comes in pretty well the same. It says, so they told the king, saying, here is Nathan the prophet, verse 23. Now, the we, I'm assuming, or they that told him that this is Nathan, I assume, is Bathsheba, and I just lost her name. Abishag. That's slipped my mind there for a second. I'm assuming it was Abishag and Bathsheba. Well, if she knows some of the king's closest men by name now, it might hint that, okay, this has gone on for a little while, that she's been in there tending to the king, right, as, like we mentioned last time, bedside nurse almost. Well, she even knows these people by name, which would also kind of maybe give reason as to why there was that little subtle reminder back up in verse 15 about the king being old and Abishag still being in there. Maybe a little bit of time has lapsed. I mean, Adonijah wouldn't have actually pulled all this off in just a couple of hours, right? More than likely, this took at least a few days, I would think, to get everything going. Well, now you have them having this conversation. Apparently, she knows who Nathan is, and they both voice and say, here's Nathan the prophet. So Nathan comes in verse 24 and said, basically, come in verse 23, he bowed down, but, you know, David didn't actually say anything to him. He just immediately got up and then he began speaking to David. Now, I don't know if there's a difference because it's a man. I don't know if it's a different because it's different because it's Nathan the prophet. But when Bathsheba came in, she bowed down, paid homage, and then he asked, what is it that you need? What is your desire? Well, Nathan is not exactly the same, and I don't know if there's a rhyme or reason for that, but he comes in, he bows down, and immediately starts speaking to David, saying, my Lord, O king, have you said, Adonijah shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? Now, do you think that Nathan believes at all that David has actually put all this into play? That he's actually been the one to say, this is what we're going to do, is put Adonijah in as king? I don't think so. I don't think that's the case at all. Rhetorical question, but a little reminder like, hey, think about what's going on here, right? And obviously, right, he doesn't know everything that's going on because of his circumstance, but he has that rhetorical question, then he has all the information piled in the middle, and then he closes it in verse 27 saying, has this thing been done by my Lord the king? And you have not told your servant who should sit on the throne of my Lord the king after him. Again, I think he knows the answer to that question. He's doing it, though, to get David's mind kind of thinking about the situation and everything that's going on. And they're recognizing right now that even the people in verse 25, they're standing, they're shouting, saying, long live King Adonijah. His following has begun. Right? He has people who are already siding up with him, and here they shout, long live King Adonijah. So he has the support. Right? So things are moving forward. They're progressing quickly, and now they need to make haste and actually make something happen. That's going to move us. That kind of closes out that section, this deceitful exaltation. And this next section that we're going to go into is rightful king declared. And that'll cover verse 28 through verse 55. Verse 28 through 55. Now, the first section that we'll look at is actually David's command that he gives to them. Now, you remember when we first started talking about this as far as David and his physical health, and I'd said, will you consider even his mental health as we move through this? And we're fixing to see he's still very sharp. He has quick instruction. He knows exactly what they need to do to override this plan of Adonijah. Yes, sir.
Back in verse 25, whenever they say long live King Adonijah, the people there at that celebration or whatever, do they know that King David is still alive at this point?
I would assume that they know that he is alive. Something of that nature would be known, across the whole kingdom. But just the same as that, I would assume that they know his physical condition. They know he's pretty well bedridden, and it wouldn't be all that strange or all that odd even to see the oldest of his sons that is alive, right, moving into this position as king. So it wouldn't seem all that strange, I don't think. And, you know, if you have enough backing, you have enough support, you have a priest with you, you have a military commander with you, most likely people are not really going to question the matter, right? Yes, sir.
Especially when you're thinking about the nations around them and how they usually had new kings step in, either by murder or firstborn coming into the throne. That's how this whole thing started, was the people were asking for a king like the nations around them. So they, just a thought.
Yeah. I mean, it all looks very familiar, I would assume, to them, every bit of it. You think about even, like you say, the previous King Saul, very similar in how he was brought in to be king. David would have been in a similar fashion, and the people would have seen some of these things before, and I mean, easily would have just thought, okay, well, this is the king's command. You know, this is happening. It's one of his sons. It's his oldest son. We're fixing to have a new king, right? They would have easily considered that thought. But yeah, good questions. So David's response to them, beginning there in verse 28, and this is rightful king declared. So we're fixing to transition now and focus our attention towards Solomon. But if somebody will, read verse 28 through verse 31.
Then King David answered and said, "Call Bathsheba to me." So she came into the king's presence and stood before the king. And the king took an oath and said, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from every distress, just as I swore to you by the Lord God of Israel, saying, Assuredly Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place. So I certainly will do this day." Then Bathsheba bowed with her face to the earth and paid homage to the king, and said, "Let my lord King David live forever."
Thanks, sir. All right, that first verse, in verse 28, here's King's response. King David, "Call Bathsheba to me." Now, she was just in the room. The thought is, if you have one individual coming in to make a claim to the king, that one's going to come in, they're going to make their case, state their case. And then if someone else comes in also to state their case with the king, the first one's going to go ahead and remove themselves. So as you're not going to have a situation where one might influence the other, but each has their opportunity to speak to the king, to plead their case. So Bathsheba has stepped out of the room. Nathan has said everything that he has to say. And now David says, now tell Bathsheba to come back. So he's bringing her back into the room. Now, I don't think that there's anything that says Abishag actually left the room. She was in there earlier. I assume she's still in the room. But Bathsheba had left. Now Bathsheba is coming back in after conversation that Nathan was able to have without any kind of interruption. Now, David was reminded of this previous oath that he had made in the times past. And there are people that question whether or not David ever actually made this oath, right? If you read through 2 Samuel, there's the mention of this son of yours is going to be a king. He's going to build my temple. He's going to do all these things, but it's never stated who exactly it is. Well, there's some that question, okay, well, is this just Nathan? Is this Bathsheba trying to pull a fast one on David in his older age? I don't think so. He says straight out, look, I made this oath to you at one time. Now, I'm fixing to make another oath. In this oath, he is basically going to say, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from every distress. He's going to lead it off of that. And I find that interesting. You think about where David's at, and just a point of application here. You think about where he's at in his life. All his life, he's been this mighty warrior, even as a young man, right? He's the one that took down Goliath. He's been known for his trust in the Lord. He rightly got his name, a man after God's own heart. And now he's in this point to where he can't even hardly get out of his bed or stay warm. Probably the weakest that he's ever been in his life, physically speaking, this man of war, this battle hero. Where's his attention still turn immediately? To the Lord. He still has all that respect. He still has the proper view and the proper honor that he's showing. They've come in and bowed to him, and now he's immediately opened this up recognizing the Lord and him being the one that has delivered him and everything that he has done. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I was just reading, learning a reference in First Chronicles, chapter 22, when David is telling Solomon that he will build the temple.
Mm-hmm.
That God had told him he was a man of blood, he could not do it. Solomon would. Probably, I would think at this point, that's when Solomon knew he would be king.
Well, in the as far as the writing time from Chronicles, it was something that was written much later. And there's bits and pieces that are not in the Chronicles, so it makes it a little bit challenging to nail down a definite timeline. You won't find the stuff with Adonijah in the Chronicles. You won't find the stuff dealing with David and Bathsheba in the Chronicles. So it's hard to say for certain. Now, I believe that he knows. I believe that he has known. I believe that Bathsheba knew just the same, and David has told them, just as he says, at some point. It's just as far as...
David would lie about it.
No, I don't either.
He said, I swore to you.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe he's being 100% honest. And the only reason I brought out the fact that some people question it was, well, to mention that some do, but I don't understand where they get that reasoning. You know what I mean? He says immediately that I will make this oath to you. And he recognizes even God in this as the Lord lives, right? Who has redeemed my life from every distress. And it's common language for David. He said these things before. Yes, sir.
Can't help but think with that, as the Lord lives, to think that in David's mind, I mean, here he is with Nathan and Bathsheba, and then conversation regarding Solomon, and then the situation with Adonijah. Can't help but think that David's mind's going back to the conversation he had with Nathan after everything he did with Bathsheba, and the consequences that would come from within his own family, but then the blessing that came in Solomon from it all.
Right.
So it's just kind of all of that flooding through, but in it all, God never left, and
Right.
he still had God in his mind.
Right. And even here at this point of his life, that's immediately where his focus goes. And even, when we get into some of his final instruction to Solomon, you'll recognize quickly how much his attention is on trusting in God still. The man after God's own heart, he still has that kind of mindset, and he continues to tell Solomon those things. But yeah, to think about, the history that this group of people have, in the times past, and how God has helped them through all of these things. It is remarkable when you think about the whole, going back into Bathsheba and David from the very get-go. Yes, sir.
This just shows that David has lost it physically, but he has not lost it mentally.
No, he hasn't.
He's still got his faculties.
Yes, sir. In the mental state, I really think is a lot to do with his life. I mean, he lived a tough life, on the run a lot, fighting in battle. That's going to have its toll, but mentally, he is still very sound and knows exactly what they need to do, in this situation to make sure that Adonijah does not follow through with his plan. But good comments, and, I wish I knew exactly how that time frame worked in the Chronicles, and I'm going to reference it more as we go because it would answer some questions we have here for certain, but I think we know without a shadow of doubt, I really think we know that Solomon knew, that he was going to be king. I think Bathsheba knew. I think David, just as he tells them here, I swore this to you, now I'm going to make this oath today, just as the Lord who has delivered me lives, this day this is going to come into action. He says this day Solomon is going to be king, and he's fixing to counter everything that Adonijah is trying to do. And saying that, immediately Bathsheba, just as she came in, right, bowed her face to the ground. She bowed her face to the ground again, and leaving, verse 31, then Bathsheba bowed with her face to the earth and paid homage to the king and said, let my Lord King David live forever. Again, showing respect, showing honor, showing her gratitude for his position, for him holding up to what he had said that he would do. And it's not a statement, you see this a lot in pagan nations where they would say this about their ruler, live forever in that sense. Well, it wasn't all that common to my understanding with God's people. So it's kind of a phrase of the highest praise, if you will, to David that she could possibly give him, and that's her statement as she's getting ready to go out of there. Now, we'll go ahead and we'll look at this next couple of verses. If somebody will, look at verse 32 and 33, if you will, read those, please.
King David said, "Call to me Zadok the priest, and Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada." So they came before the king. And the king also said to them, "Take with you the servants of your lord, and you have Solomon my son ride on my own mule, and take him down to Gihon."
Okay, do you recognize some similarity? Do you remember what it was that Adonijah did, who it was, his first followers? Where do you think he learned that? Right? I mean, he had some understanding. He chose his people wisely. King David, the first thing he does, he says, okay, call to me Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. Now, Benaiah is a man of war, right? He's one of the mighty men. He's a leader of sorts, military, if you will, where you also have Zadok the priest. So same kind of frame of mind as what Adonijah was thinking. I need a priest, I need a military leader, get them on my side. Well, David also says, now give me a prophet as well. Bring Nathan in, which is kind of significant, because if it's going to be the king, if Solomon's going to be the king, and you have one of God's prophets speaking on the matter just the same, it carries with it much more validity, saying, okay, well, this is God's chosen individual. And it was even Nathan, if I remember correctly, even when Solomon was born, when he was born, if I'm remembering correctly, said he was told him by the Lord to call his name, oh man, here I go for trying to pull something off my memory. Ultimately, what the word meant was beloved by God. But I can't remember the exact name that he said to call him now that I try and pull that off the top of my head. Huh? That's going to bug me. I shouldn't try to pull that one out. But it was beloved by God, right? Well, maybe Nathan, right, he put the dots together early on. Maybe, at some point later David told him, but Jedediah, there we go. Appreciate that. So that name actually meaning beloved by God.
I'm hard of hearing. What was that name?
Jedediah. Yep, Jedediah. So he's putting together this group of men, the right people that he needs to start countering the action. But you do see similarities between what King David says and what Adonijah actually looked for in people for followers, right? He knew what he was doing. He was educated in this matter, if you will. But you have the priest, you have the military leader, you have the prophet, and then he says, take with you the servants of the Lord. Now, if you jump over to verse 38, kind of jump forward just a little bit, it says, so Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and the Cherethites and the Pelethites went down and had Solomon ride on the king's mule and took him to Gihon. Now, to my understanding, this is somewhat like the king's bodyguards, if you will, kind of these other military men that he can use, kind of at his disposal. And he says, look, bring these men with you. Now, if we know anything about what Adonijah is doing and what Nathan has said, he might even take lives. You're going to need some people, right, who can take care of you. So he brings in these men who are recognized somewhat as these royal bodyguard, if you will. And then he says in verse 33, let Solomon ride on my mule. Now, there's a vast difference between what Adonijah had done. Right? Remember what he did when he was getting his entourage together? He had the men, he had the horses, he had 50 men running before him, chariots, all this stuff, right? You see the difference in humility? Now, Solomon's going to come in on David's mule, just this single mule, right? But it's David's mule. People are going to immediately recognize this and say, oh, hold on, wait a minute. This is the king's mule. You remember in the book of Esther, when King Ahasuerus was asking Hammond what he should do to the one that he wants to show favor to. Now, this is a pagan nation, of course. Right? Do you remember what he asked him and what Hammond actually said? Right? He told him, he said, put the royal robe on this person that you want to show favor to. Let him ride in on the king's horse, and let the oh, I can't remember the name of it, the seal or whatever it was, be on the horse and all these things, and basically be viewed as a king, right? Well, King David is saying, my son is going to ride on my mule, and the people will see that, and they will recognize that, and it'll even bring more when they see Nathan the prophet, as well as these royal bodyguard, if you will, and Zadok the priest. So he has the right people. David doesn't have any concern or question as far as, okay, what should I do here? He knows immediately what he needs to do to counter what Adonijah is doing. But he's also had some experience at this, right? One of his other sons has already done something very similar. That's second? Okay. All right, thank you for your attention.